What would you do if one day the sign that had been in your family for generations suddenly went up in flames at the hands of a control-freak neighbor? Even more interesting, what if that action landed her with a $4 million bill? I never imagined our family farm sign would become the centerpiece of the most intense legal battle our quiet suburb had ever seen, but that's exactly what happened when Patricia Coleman, our neighborhood's self-promoted dictator, decided our heritage didn't fit her aesthetic vision. Comment below to let me know where you are watching from, and let us begin. I still remember the shock on her face when she realized that her impulsive act of vandalism had inadvertently walked her straight into an insurance claim nightmare that would change her life forever. Our family had always minded our own business, growing our organic produce and running our small retreat on the outskirts of town, but apparently that wasn't uniform enough for the illustrious Homeowners Association and its power-hungry president. Little did she know that our weathered wooden sign wasn't just a piece of wood. It was a protected family heirloom with a value that would make her designer handbag collection look like pocket change. I was tending to our organic tomato beds when I first noticed Patricia Coleman's silver Mercedes creeping up our driveway like a predator stalking its prey. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and perpetual scowl were unmistakable, even from a distance. As the president of our neighborhood's Homeowners Association, she had earned quite the reputation, and not the good kind. Mom and Dad had warned me about her when I moved back to help with the family farm, but I'd managed to avoid a direct confrontation until now. The farm had been in our family for 4 generations, since my great-grandfather broke ground here. We were here long before the suburbs expanded and engulfed us, long before the HOA formed and started dictating the acceptable shade of beige for mailboxes. Patricia stepped out of her car with a manila folder clutched to her chest like a shield, her heels sinking slightly into the soft soil of our driveway. "Mr. Williams," she called out, not bothering to get my first name right, "we need to discuss your signage situation." The way she said signage made it sound like I was displaying obscene imagery rather than our family farm's hand-carved wooden sign. "It's Miller, not Williams," I corrected her, wiping my hands on my jeans as I approached. "And what seems to be the problem with our sign?" The sign in question stood proudly at the entrance to our property, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship my great-grandfather had carved himself when he established Miller Family Farms in 1924. It had been lovingly maintained and restored over the years, a symbol of our family's perseverance and connection to the land. Patricia's nose wrinkled as if she'd smelled something unpleasant. "Well, Mr. Miller, your sign is in direct violation of HOA Ordinance 7.3, subsection B regarding external displays and signage. It exceeds the maximum allowed dimensions by 43%, uses unauthorized materials, and frankly disrupts the aesthetic cohesion of our community." She flipped open her folder, producing a printout of HOA regulations with highlighted passages. "As president of the Homeowners Association, it's my responsibility to inform you that you have 14 days to remove it or face a fine of $200 per day thereafter." I couldn't help but laugh, which only made her scowl deepen. "Miss Coleman, this sign predates your HOA by about 70 years. We have grandfathered approvals from the county and explicit exemptions from the city planning department." I crossed my arms, standing my ground. "The farm and everything on it, including that sign, was here before any of these houses were even blueprints. We're not removing family history because it doesn't match your vision of aesthetic cohesion." Patricia's face flushed, but she maintained her composure barely. "The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Miller, no exceptions. This isn't about history, it's about property values and community standards. That rustic look might have been charming once, but times change. The committee has decided, and you'll need to comply." The condescension in her voice was thick enough to spread on toast. "I'll be back to verify compliance," she added, turning on her heel. As she stalked back to her car, she called over her shoulder, "This isn't over. One way or another, that eyesore is coming down." I watched her drive away, her taillights glowing like angry red eyes as she disappeared down the road. Little did I know just how prophetic her parting words would be. That night, around 3:17 a.m., according to the timestamp, Our security cameras captured a hooded figure approaching the farm entrance. The image was grainy in the darkness, but clear enough to show someone splashing liquid on our beloved sign, then striking a match. The wood, dry from a hot summer, caught immediately. The figure, whose build and distinctive gait were strikingly familiar, hurried away as flames engulfed the sign, spreading to the surrounding garden and part of our entrance archway. The alarm system woke me and I ran outside in my pajamas, garden hose in hand, but it was too late. By the time the fire department arrived, our family heirloom was nothing but charred remains and glowing embers. As I stood there in the early morning darkness, watching firefighters douse the smoldering ruins of our sign, I felt a mixture of heartbreak and rage boiling inside me. The sign wasn't just wood and paint. It was a physical link to the generations of millers who had worked this land before me. My father joined me outside, his face grim in the flashing lights of the fire truck. "I've seen the security footage," he said quietly. "It was her, wasn't it?" I nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "Patricia Coleman just declared war on the wrong family," I replied, already thinking about our next move. "But she's about to learn that actions have consequences. Very expensive consequences." The morning after the fire brought a flurry of activity to our farm. Insurance adjusters taking photos, police officers collecting evidence, and neighbors gathering to gawk at the damage and offer sympathies. What was once a proud symbol of our heritage was now a blackened skeleton. The carved lettering that had spelled Miller Family Farms STS 1924, now unrecognizable. Mom couldn't even look at it without tearing up. "4 generations," she kept saying, shaking her head. "Your great-grandfather carved that with his own hands when he was younger than you are now." Dad placed a comforting arm around her shoulders, but I could see the muscle in his jaw working overtime as he clenched his teeth. We Millers weren't the type to seek conflict, but we also weren't the type to back down when wronged. As I was showing the police officer the security footage on my laptop, a familiar silver Mercedes pulled into our driveway. Patricia Coleman had returned to the scene of her crime, and the audacity of it made my blood boil. Patricia stepped out of her car wearing oversized sunglasses and a look of practiced concern. She approached our gathering with the confidence of someone who believed themselves untouchable. "I heard about the terrible accident," she announced to everyone within earshot. "Such a shame, but perhaps a blessing in disguise? Now you can replace it with something more appropriate for our neighborhood standards?" The police officer looked up from my laptop screen, then back at Patricia, then back at the screen again, making the connection immediately. Dad stepped forward before I could react. "It wasn't an accident, Patricia. Someone deliberately set fire to our property last night." His voice was calm but carried an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "Fortunately, we have excellent security cameras." Patricia's expression flickered for just a moment, a flash of panic quickly masked by indignation. "Well, I'm sure it was just some teenagers causing trouble, or perhaps," her voice lowered conspiratorially, "an electrical issue. I've noticed your wiring seems rather outdated. Maybe this is an insurance opportunity for you." The sheer audacity of her statement left me momentarily speechless. Not only was she standing at the scene of her crime, but she was now suggesting we were the ones committing insurance fraud. "Our electrical system was completely upgraded last year," I replied, struggling to keep my voice level, "and our cameras captured very clear footage of the arsonist. Interesting how they were about your height with your distinctive walk. Even more interesting how they drove away in a car that looks remarkably like yours." Patricia's face paled beneath her makeup, but she recovered quickly. "Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Miller? Because that would be slander, and I have an excellent attorney." She squared her shoulders, looking around at the small crowd that had gathered. "I came here to offer my condolences as HOA president, not to be falsely accused. If you continue with these ridiculous allegations, you'll be hearing from my lawyer." One of our longtime neighbors, Mrs. Fitzgerald, cleared her throat. "Actually, Patricia, I was walking my dog last night around 11 p.m. and I saw your car parked just down the road from the Miller place. Thought it was strange at that hour." Patricia's composure cracked visibly. "I was at home all night. You must be mistaken. This is outrageous. I won't stand here and be ambushed by farmers and their sympathizers." She fumbled with her car keys, backing away. "If you persist with these accusations, I'll have no choice but to sue for defamation. The HOA will not tolerate this kind of hostility in our community." As she retreated to her car, I called after her, "Don't worry, Patricia. Everything will come to light soon enough. We're just getting started." I had already contacted our family attorney, James Harrington, who had been with us through 3 generations of Millers. He was reviewing the footage and preparing to move forward with both criminal charges and a civil suit. As Patricia's Mercedes sped away, kicking up gravel in its wake, I turned to my parents with grim determination. "She thinks she can bully us because we're just farmers, but she's about to learn a very expensive lesson about messing with the Miller family." Later that afternoon, our insurance adjuster Michael Reeves sat at our kitchen table reviewing the documentation of the sign. His eyebrows had been climbing steadily higher as he went through the paperwork. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I have to say, most people don't have this level of documentation for family heirlooms. This appraisal from the Historical Society, the cultural heritage insurance rider your grandfather added in the 70s, it's impressive." He looked up at us, clearly impressed. "Based on the documentation and the terms of your policy, the value of the destroyed sign is substantial." "Very substantial," Dad nodded solemnly. My father was meticulous about preserving family history. He had the sign appraised as a historical artifact when developers started buying up the surrounding farmland. Said someday people might try to erase our history here, and he wanted to make sure that couldn't happen easily. Michael nodded, making notes. "Well, in cases of deliberate vandalism or arson, our company typically pursues the responsible party for reimbursement. Once the police confirm the perpetrator, we'll be moving to recover damages from them or their insurance." He paused, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I should mention, given the documented historical value and the business impact on your farm retreat operation, we're talking about a claim in the neighborhood of $4 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. $4 million. Patricia Coleman had no idea what she had done. As Michael packed up his briefcase, he added casually, "By the way, if the responsible party happens to be a homeowner with a standard policy, they're likely looking at denial of coverage for intentional acts, which means they'd be personally liable for the full amount." After he left, I looked at my parents, a small, grim smile forming on my face. "I'm guessing Patricia Coleman doesn't have $4 million lying around. This isn't about money for us. It's about justice and making sure she never does something like this to anyone else again." Dad nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Just remember, son, this isn't about revenge. It's about standing our ground and protecting what's ours." But I could see in his eyes that he wasn't entirely convinced of his own words. Sometimes justice and revenge look remarkably similar from certain angles. The Miller family farm sign wasn't just wood and paint. It was our legacy made physical. My great-grandfather, Thomas Miller, had carved it himself in 1924, after he purchased the land following his return from World War I. The story goes that he worked on it for weeks, carefully selecting the right piece of oak, aging and treating the wood, and carving each letter with painstaking precision. It wasn't just a marker, it was a declaration that after years of fighting in muddy trenches overseas, he had finally found home. The sign had weathered countless storms, survived the Great Depression when the family nearly lost everything, and stood as a silent witness to 4 generations of Millers working the land. Every decade or so, someone in the family would carefully restore it, adding protective coatings against the elements but taking care to preserve the original craftsmanship. When I was 10, I helped my grandfather apply a special preservative he'd researched for months. "This sign is more than wood, Jamie," he told me as we worked. "It's a promise to the past and a welcome to the future." Those words had stuck with me all these years later. Our family had deep roots in this community, much deeper than the McMansions and their HOA regulations that had sprung up around us in the last 20 years. My parents, Robert and Sarah Miller, had transformed what was once a traditional produce farm into a successful organic operation with a small retreat center where stressed-out city dwellers could reconnect with nature. Dad handled the agricultural side with the wisdom passed down through generations, while Mom brought her background in hospitality to create the retreat experience. After college and a few years working in technology in the city, I had returned home when Dad's back problems started making the physical labor too difficult. My computer skills proved surprisingly useful for modernizing our operations, including installing the high-definition security system that had captured Patricia Coleman's midnight arson. We weren't wealthy by suburban standards, but the farm was profitable and, more importantly, it was ours. A living testament to family perseverance against developers, economic downturns, and now petty tyrants like Patricia. Patricia Coleman had moved to the area about 5 years ago, buying one of the largest homes in the new development that had sprung up on former farmland adjacent to our property. Within 6 months, she had maneuvered her way onto the HOA board, and within a year she was president. Since then, she had ruled with an iron fist wrapped in designer cashmere. Her victims were numerous. The Johnsons forced to repaint their house because the shade of blue was 0.5% more vibrant than approved. Old Mr. Gonzalez fined repeatedly because his grass grew a quarter inch too high while he was recovering from hip surgery. The Chen family, harassed about their holiday decorations for being excessive and non-standard. Patricia's motivation wasn't hard to decipher. Control. She saw herself as the curator of property values and community standards, with an emphasis on conformity that bordered on obsession. Our farm, with its working tractors, free-range chickens, and yes, our historic wooden sign, was a thorn in her manicured side. A reminder that not everything could be controlled, sanitized, and forced into her vision of suburban perfection. The irony was that our farm retreat had actually increased nearby property values. Real estate listings in the area prominently featured proximity to historic Miller family farms and retreat as a selling point. The same organic tomatoes Patricia had referred to as those dirty vegetables were served in the upscale restaurants she frequented in town. But facts didn't matter to Patricia, only her vision of what the community should be, with matching mailboxes and regulation heath shrubbery. She had tried various tactics to pressure us before, spurious complaints to the county about noise, from roosters, that we didn't even have, attempts to rezone our property, even approaching my parents with lowball offers from anonymous developers. Each attempt had failed, and with each failure her animosity had grown. The sign had become her fixation, a symbol of our refusal to bend to her will. In her mind, removing it would be the first step in erasing our presence entirely. What she hadn't counted on was that the Miller family had been fighting to protect our land for nearly a century, and we'd gotten very good at it. As I went through old family albums that evening, looking for photos of the sign for our insurance claim, I found a picture of my grandfather standing proudly next to it on the day he added it to the county's historical registry in 1978. He was looking directly at the camera with the same determination I'd seen in my father's eyes countless times, and now occasionally caught in my own reflection. There was a note on the back in his meticulous handwriting: "Protected at last. Let them try to take it now." He had foreseen this battle decades ago and quietly prepared for it. The historical designation, the specialized insurance policy, the detailed documentation of the sign's cultural significance, these weren't coincidences. They were armor, forged by a man who understood that sometimes you have to fight to preserve what matters. As I studied the photograph, a plan began forming in my mind. Patricia Coleman had declared war on the wrong family. She had no idea what forces she had set in motion when she struck that match. But she was about to find out. The next morning, our attorney James Harrington arrived with a folder of documents and a look of controlled anticipation. "I've reviewed everything," he said as we sat at the kitchen table. "The security footage, the insurance policy, the historical registry documentation. I've also spoken with the police detective and the fire marshal. He spread several papers in front of us. We have more than enough to proceed with both criminal charges and a civil suit. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with and make sure Patricia Coleman realizes the gravity of her situation. Dad leaned forward, studying the documents. What exactly are you suggesting, James? Our attorney smiled thinly. I believe it's time to set a trap for our HOA president, one that will give her every opportunity to dig her own grave even deeper. Mom looked concerned. We don't want to stoop to her level, she cautioned. James nodded reassuringly. Nothing illegal or unethical, Sarah, just a carefully orchestrated chance for Patricia to reveal her true nature and for us to document every word. First thing Monday morning, I accompanied our attorney James Harrington to the offices of Sentinel Insurance Group, where we met with Michael Reeves and his supervisor Eleanor Vasquez. The conference room had the tasteful, expensive decor that suggested they handled significant amounts of money, which, in our case, they certainly did. We've reviewed all the documentation, Eleanor began, her tone professional but with an undercurrent of something almost like excitement. I have to say, in 23 years in this business, I've rarely seen a case where the liability is so clear-cut and the documentation so thorough. She slid a folder across the table. Based on the cultural heritage rider, the Historical Society's valuation, the business interruption calculations, and the documented provenance of the artifact, we've calculated the total claim value at $4,200,000. The number, even though I'd heard a ballpark figure before, still made my breath catch. Eleanor continued. In cases of deliberate destruction, our policy is to pay the claim to our insured, you, and then pursue recovery from the responsible party. We'll need to coordinate our legal approach with yours. James nodded, jotting notes. We've already filed a police report, and the detective believes there's sufficient evidence for criminal charges of arson and vandalism. We're preparing a civil suit as well, but I wanted to make sure we're aligned on strategy before proceeding. He looked up. The responsible party is unlikely to have assets sufficient to cover this amount. Her home is valued at approximately $1,200,000, but the mortgage is substantial. She drives luxury vehicles, but they're leased. We need to determine if her homeowner's insurance might cover any portion. Michael, the insurance adjuster, shook his head. Almost certainly not. Standard homeowners' policies explicitly exclude intentional criminal acts. If she set fire to your sign deliberately, her insurance company will deny coverage, leaving her personally liable for the full amount. Eleanor nodded in agreement, which means bankruptcy is likely her only option, unless she has hidden assets we're not aware of. James leaned back in his chair, considering this. So, we're looking at a situation where she loses her home, her position, possibly faces jail time, and still may not be able to fully compensate my clients. The room fell silent for a moment as the full impact of Patricia's actions and their consequences sank in. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a surprising hint of pity. Patricia had destroyed something precious to my family, but in doing so, she had effectively destroyed her own life as well. Before we proceed, James continued, we need stronger confirmation that Patricia Coleman was indeed the arsonist. The security footage is compelling but not absolutely conclusive. We need her to incriminate herself more directly. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose to do that? James smiled slightly. We create a situation where she believes she has the upper hand, one where her arrogance leads her to reveal more than she intends. He outlined his plan, which was both simple and devious. I would approach Patricia, appearing defeated and financially distressed, suggesting that without the sign we might be forced to sell the farm after all. The conversation would be recorded legally under our state's one-party consent laws. People like Patricia can't resist gloating when they think they've won, James explained. And in her case, a moment of gloating could be worth millions. As we left the insurance office, I felt the weight of what we were undertaking. This wasn't just about money or even justice. It was about consequences, about showing that you couldn't simply burn away someone else's heritage without repercussions. "Are you sure you're comfortable with this approach?" James asked as we walked to the parking lot. "Playing the defeated farmer might be challenging for someone with your temperament." I had to smile at his diplomatic phrasing. The miller's stubbornness was well known. "I can play whatever role is needed," I assured him. Patricia Coleman has spent years pushing people around with no consequences. She's about to learn that some actions can't be undone with a checkbook or a connection to the right people. James nodded, satisfied. "Just remember, our goal is documentation, not confrontation. Let her talk. Let her incriminate herself. The more rope we give her, the more thoroughly she'll hang herself." As I drove home, I rehearsed my approach in my head. The defeated slump of the shoulders, the worried tone, the hints about financial trouble. It went against every fiber of my being to appear beaten. But sometimes you have to lose a small battle to win the war. Back at the farm, I found Mom and Dad sorting through old photographs of the sign for the insurance documentation. Mom's eyes were red from crying, but her hands were steady as she carefully labeled each image with dates and descriptions. Dad looked up as I entered. "How did it go?" I filled them in on the meeting and the plan going forward. Dad listened silently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Your grandfather would approve," he said finally. "Not of seeking revenge, but of standing up for what's ours. He always said the land remembers who fights for it." He picked up one of the photographs, a faded color image from the 1970s, showing the sign decorated for the bicentennial, red, white, and blue bunting carefully arranged around the carved letters. "Do what you need to do. Just remember who we are in the process." I nodded, understanding perfectly what he meant. The Millers fought when necessary, but we did so with integrity. We wouldn't sink to Patricia's level of pettiness or malice. We would simply ensure that justice was served, completely, thoroughly, and by the book. Later that afternoon, James called with an update. "The police have officially filed charges of arson and criminal mischief. They are planning to bring Patricia in for questioning tomorrow." He paused. "This is about to get very real for her, very quickly. It's the perfect time for your chance encounter." We discussed timing and approach, settling on the following morning at the local coffee shop, where Patricia was known to stop daily before heading to her real estate office. "Remember," James cautioned before hanging up, "the goal is to get her talking about the sign. Let her think you're giving up. Her arrogance is our best ally right now." After the call, I sat on our front porch, looking at the charred remains of our sign. In the fading afternoon light, I could still make out traces of the careful craftsmanship that had gone into its creation. The deliberate curves of the lettering, the thoughtful spacing, the loving attention to detail. 4 generations of my family had passed under that sign, their lives marked by its welcome. And now it was gone, reduced to ash by someone who couldn't see beyond her own narrow vision of what belonged and what didn't. Tomorrow would be the beginning of Patricia Coleman's education in consequences. I intended to make it thorough. The village coffee shop was busy with the morning rush when I arrived at 7:45 a.m., precisely when Patricia Coleman typically stopped for her daily non-bat latte. I deliberately chose a table near the door and hunched over a cup of black coffee, projecting an image of dejection and worry. The small audio recorder in my jacket pocket was already running, completely legal in our state with one-party consent. At 7:52, Patricia walked in wearing a tailored pantsuit and an expression of smug satisfaction that faltered momentarily when she spotted me. After ordering her complicated coffee, she couldn't resist approaching my table. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You look troubled this morning. Still upset about that old sign? You know, sometimes clearing away the old makes room for improvements." I looked up, feigning surprise at her approach, then let my shoulders slump in practiced defeat. "Yeah, well, that sign was more than just wood, Ms. Coleman. Without it, the farm feels incomplete. We've lost bookings at the retreat. People come for the history, the authenticity. The insurance is giving us trouble too. They're saying without proof of who did it, they might not cover the full replacement." Patricia leaned forward, lowering her voice. Insurance companies are always looking for ways to avoid paying, but really, Mr. Miller, perhaps this is a sign, no pun intended, that it's time to consider other options for that property. I happen to know several developers who would make very generous offers even in this unfortunate situation. I played my role, suggesting that Dad was considering retirement, and without the sign-in retreat bookings, keeping the farm going had become much harder. Patricia could barely contain her excitement. "Well, everything happens for a reason," she said, stirring her coffee unnecessarily. "That sign was charming in its rustic way, but not really suited to the direction our community is growing. Sometimes a fresh start is best for everyone. Of course, if you'd simply complied with the HOA regulations when I first approached you, none of this unpleasantness would have been necessary." The moment the words left her mouth, I saw the flash of panic in her eyes, the realization that she had said too much. I kept my expression neutral with effort. "Necessary?" I repeated slowly. "What exactly was necessary, Ms. Coleman?" She backpedaled quickly, flustered. "I simply meant that conflict could have been avoided with proper compliance. Obviously, I had nothing to do with whatever happened to your sign." Her hand trembled slightly as she raised her coffee cup to her lips. "How did you know the fire happened at night?" I asked quietly. "I don't believe I mentioned that." Patricia's face paled beneath her makeup. She stood abruptly, gathering her things. Everyone knows it happened at night. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have appointments to keep." As she hurried toward the door, I called after her, "The police have some appointments for you too, Patricia. I believe they'll be contacting you very soon." By the time I returned to the farm, we had already received an official notice from the HOA citing us for multiple violations, including improper maintenance of frontage, unauthorized agricultural activities in a residential zone, and bizarrely, creating a hazardous environment through neglect, all referring to the burned sign and garden that Patricia herself had destroyed. Patricia's counterattack continued throughout the week. First came the HOA violations, then pressure on witnesses, including threatening Mrs. Fitzgerald about her garden gnomes when she refused to change her statement. Next, Patricia somehow convinced the local newspaper to run a small piece suggesting the fire might have been an insurance scam on our part. She even filed a restraining order against me, claiming I had threatened her at the coffee shop, though the judge quickly dismissed it when our recording proved otherwise. The neighborhood became a battleground, with residents forced to choose sides. Many who had suffered under Patricia's reign quietly supported us, while others in her social circle closed ranks around her. The culmination of Patricia's counterattack came when I was served with papers for a civil suit. She was actually suing me for defamation, claiming I had falsely accused her of arson, seeking $2 million for loss of income and emotional distress. When I showed the papers to James, he actually chuckled. "This is desperation," he said. "She's hoping to intimidate you into dropping the charges and insurance claim. Her own lawsuit will help expose her by putting all our evidence into the public record." Each move Patricia made seemed to backfire, strengthening our case rather than weakening it. The conference room at James Harrington's law office was lined with documents, photographs, and timelines. The assembled evidence of Patricia Coleman's vendetta against our family and her criminal destruction of our property. Detective Morgan from the county sheriff's office stood at the head of the table, reviewing his notes based on the security footage from your cameras, the statement from Mrs. Fitzgerald about seeing Ms. Coleman's vehicle in the vicinity, the traces of accelerant matching the type found in Ms. Coleman's garage, and her own incriminating statements. The district attorney has decided to file formal charges of second-degree arson, criminal mischief, and filing a false police report. He looked up at us. This isn't her first brush with the law either. We discovered she faced similar accusations at her previous residence in Connecticut, harassing neighbors who didn't comply with her aesthetic standards. Though nothing that escalated to this level, she managed to avoid charges then by moving here. This new information didn't surprise me. but it did confirm what we'd suspected. Patricia's behavior was part of a pattern, not an isolated incident. But the true bombshell came the following day, when a white van pulled up to our farm. The driver, wearing a cap with county records embroidered on it, delivered a large envelope addressed to me. Inside was a copy of the traffic camera footage from the intersection a quarter-mile from our property. The timestamp matched the night of the fire, and there, clear as day, was Patricia's silver Mercedes turning onto our road at 3:08 a.m. and then leaving 9 minutes later, precisely matching our timeline. The county clerk had discovered it while digitizing records, and having heard about our case, recognized its significance. James was ecstatic when I called him. "This is the final nail in her coffin," he said. The security footage was somewhat grainy due to the darkness, but this traffic cam footage clearly shows her vehicle and license plate. There's no plausible deniability left. He paused, and I could hear papers shuffling. "I've already sent a copy to Detective Morgan and the insurance company. We should move quickly before she realizes how much trouble she's in." Our insurance company didn't waste time. Within 48 hours of receiving the traffic camera footage, they sent Patricia Coleman an official letter demanding payment of $4,200,000 for the destruction of our historically registered property. The letter outlined in excruciating detail how the amount was calculated. The historical value of the sign as determined by multiple appraisals, the business losses from canceled retreat bookings, the damage to our entrance and garden, and various other costs associated with the restoration. A copy of the letter was delivered to us as well, and I had to admit a certain grim satisfaction seeing the astronomical figure laid out in black and white. The letter concluded with a statement that failure to respond within 30 days would result in legal action, though we all knew Patricia couldn't possibly pay such a sum. Her response came not to the insurance company but directly to our door, in the form of a red-faced, nearly hysterical woman who had clearly abandoned all pretense of dignity and control. "This is extortion," she screamed, waving the insurance letter in my face as I stood on our porch. $4 million for a piece of rotting wood? This is insane. You can't do this to me." I remained calm, which only seemed to infuriate her further. "We didn't set the value, Patricia. Independent appraisers did, based on the sign's historical significance and our business losses. If you had a problem with burning down valuable property, perhaps you should have considered that before buying the gasoline." She flinched at the mention of gasoline, her eyes darting nervously. I never said I did it, and even if someone did, no one could have known it was worth that much. It's just a sign." I couldn't help but smile slightly. "That's the thing about arson, Patricia. The law doesn't care whether you knew the value of what you destroyed. Intent to destroy is enough." Her face crumpled then, the reality of her situation finally seeming to sink in. "My insurance won't cover this. They said it was an intentional act. I'll lose everything, my house, my car, my business." I didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of consequences settle fully upon her. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet but firm. "You should have thought of that before you decided to play with fire on our property." As Patricia drove away, tires screeching on the gravel, I called James to update him. "She came here in person practically having a meltdown about the insurance demand," I told him. "I think reality is finally setting in for her." James sighed. "It's a common reaction. People like her never believe consequences will actually apply to them until they're staring financial ruin in the face." "What's your next move?" I considered the question carefully. Despite everything Patricia had done, I found no joy in the thought of someone losing everything, even someone as deserving of comeuppance as she was. "I think it's time to offer a settlement," I said finally. "Something substantial enough to ensure justice is served, but not so crushing that she loses everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's surprisingly merciful given the circumstances," James replied. "Are you sure that's what you want to do?" I looked out over our farm, at the generations of work and love that had gone into this land. "The Millers have always believed in justice, not vengeance," I said. "Dad and Mom agree. We want consequences, not destruction. The settlement offer we drafted was still significant. Patricia would step down immediately from the HOA board, sell her house and move from the community within 6 months, make a public apology, and pay $750,000 in damages. Still a massive sum, but one that wouldn't completely bankrupt her if she sold her assets. Most importantly, the settlement included a binding non-disparagement agreement and a permanent injunction preventing her from serving on any HOA board or similar position of community authority anywhere in the future. James presented the offer to Patricia's attorney, who was visibly relieved at what he called surprising generosity given the circumstances. He promised to present it to his client immediately, though he cautioned that Patricia had not been in a rational state of mind recently. The next day, we received a counter-proposal. Patricia would accept most terms, but wanted to reduce the financial penalty to $500,000 and extend her moving timeline to 1 year. After a family discussion, we accepted. It wasn't about the money. It was about ensuring she faced real consequences and couldn't inflict similar harm on others in the future. Patricia signed the settlement papers 3 days later in James's office. She looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes hanging loosely, as if she'd lost weight, dark circles under her eyes despite attempts to conceal them with makeup. She didn't meet my gaze as she scribbled her signature on the multiple copies, her hand trembling slightly. When everything was signed, witnessed, and notarized, she finally looked up. "I suppose you think you've won," she said, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. I shook my head. This was never about winning or losing, Patricia. It was about consequences for actions. You destroyed something precious to my family, something irreplaceable, because it didn't fit your vision of what our neighborhood should be. The settlement is just ensuring that you understand the weight of that choice. She flinched at my words but said nothing more as she gathered her purse and left the office, her attorney trailing behind, looking relieved that the matter was resolved without a full trial and potential criminal conviction. Just when we thought the matter was settled, Patricia proved that a cornered adversary is most dangerous when desperate. 2 weeks after signing the settlement agreement, she filed a motion to have it invalidated, claiming she had signed under duress and with inadequate legal counsel. The motion included affidavits from 3 of her friends on the HOA board, all claiming they had witnessed me threatening and intimidating her at community meetings. James was furious when he called, "This is beyond frivolous." Her own attorney witnessed the signing and confirmed she was acting of her own free will. These allegations are complete fabrications. But now we have to appear at a hearing. We prepared thoroughly, with James subpoenaing Patricia's phone records showing calls to her witnesses just before the motion was filed. He also compiled video recordings from HOA meetings showing perfectly civil interactions between Patricia and me. When her new attorney realized how weak their position was, he attempted to withdraw the motion, but the judge refused, insisting the matter be heard as scheduled. The day of the hearing arrived with an unnervingly quiet courthouse. A last-minute change of courtroom and time requested by Patricia's attorney meant most of our supportive neighbors missed it. It felt tactical, designed to isolate us. But Patricia's final desperate gambit surprised even me. When called to testify, she appeared looking nothing like the polished HOA president who had terrorized our neighborhood. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup, replaced by a simple, almost dowdy outfit. She had even changed her hairstyle, making her appear older and more vulnerable. As she took the stand, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the very picture of a victimized woman. "I was afraid," she began, her voice trembling. "The Millers have lived in this community for generations. Everyone respects them. Who would believe me over them?" She spun a tale so outrageously false that I had to bite my tongue to keep from objecting on the spot. According to Patricia, our family had a history of using our local influence to bully neighbors, and we had manipulated evidence and pressured witnesses to frame her for a fire she swore she didn't set. During cross-examination, James approached with a folder of documents. Miss Coleman, he began pleasantly, you've painted quite a picture of the Miller family as some sort of rural mafia intimidating the community. That must have been very frightening for you. Patricia nodded earnestly, dabbing her eyes. It was terrifying. They have so much influence. James nodded sympathetically. And yet, despite this overwhelming fear, you still felt comfortable enough to issue multiple HOA violations against them after the fire, attempt to fine them thousands of dollars, file a restraining order, and sue them for defamation seeking $2 million. Those don't sound like the actions of someone terrified of retribution, do they? The courtroom fell silent as Patricia struggled to respond. I was trying to protect myself, she stammered. Using the legal system was the only way I could. James didn't let her finish. Ms. Coleman, did you know that filing false affidavits is perjury, punishable by up to 5 years in prison? James methodically dismantled her story, presenting phone records, video evidence, and finally the traffic camera footage that indisputably placed her at the scene of the fire. Your Honor, he concluded, Ms. Coleman is not a victim here. She is someone facing the consequences of her own actions who is now attempting to manipulate this court with false claims. We ask not only that her motion be denied, but that sanctions be considered for this abuse of the legal system. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the bench, had been watching Patricia's increasingly distressed reactions. When both sides finished, she removed her glasses and fixed Patricia with a stern gaze. Miss Coleman, in my years on this bench, I have seen many desperate attempts to evade responsibility. Few have been as transparent or as poorly executed as yours today. The judge's ruling devastated Patricia. She upheld our settlement agreement in its entirety and added punitive measures. Patricia would be responsible for all legal costs associated with the hearing, including our attorney's fees, and the judge referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential perjury charges. As a final blow, she ordered an immediate lien on Patricia's house to ensure compliance with the financial terms. The court will not tolerate frivolous motions based on manufactured evidence, she concluded. Ms. Coleman, you signed a legally binding agreement with open eyes and competent counsel. You will honor that agreement without further attempts to manipulate this court. As we left the courthouse, Patricia sat alone at the defendant's table, her new attorney already distancing himself from her case. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a sense of finality. Patricia had played her last card and lost decisively. 6 months after the courthouse showdown, our community gathered for the unveiling of the new Miller Family Farms sign. It stood in the same spot as its predecessor, but this version was even more beautiful, a masterpiece of craftsmanship created by a historical restoration expert who had studied photographs of the original while maintaining its authentic character. Nearly 100 people attended the small ceremony, including neighbors, longtime customers, and a reporter from the local newspaper. My parents stood proudly at the front, beaming with satisfaction and relief. As Dad addressed the crowd, thanking them for their support during our ordeal, I noticed a moving truck parked in front of Patricia Coleman's house in the distance. True to the settlement terms, she was leaving the neighborhood today. Several people followed my gaze, and a ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. The timing felt appropriate. One chapter closing as another began. Later, Mrs. Fitzgerald approached with a small, wrapped package. A housewarming gift for your sign, she said with a wink. Inside was a beautiful brass plaque engraved with the words, Restored 2025, still standing strong. I was touched by the gesture and immediately found a spot for it at the base of the sign. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Did you hear about Patricia? Apparently she tried to join the HOA at her new place in Meadowbrook, and they rejected her application when they Googled her name. I hadn't known this, and while I took no pleasure in Patricia's continued difficulties, there was a certain poetic justice to it. The settlement had required her to pay us $500,000, sell her home and move away, but her reputation following her was something none of us had anticipated. The insurance money allowed us to not only restore the sign, but also make improvements to the farm that had been on our wish list for years. We upgraded the retreat facilities, expanded our organic growing operation, and established the Miller Heritage Fund, dedicated to helping preserve historically significant family farms throughout the county. The first recipient was the Rodriguez family, whose 19th-century barn was in danger of collapsing after storm damage. Helping another family preserve their heritage felt like the perfect way to honor what we had fought for and won. In a strange way, Patricia's act of destruction had ultimately led to creation and preservation beyond our own farm. The HOA itself underwent a transformation following Patricia's departure. The new board, led by Mr. Henderson, a retired judge, rewrote many of the restrictive rules Patricia had implemented and created a special designation for heritage properties like ours. Several board members visited to apologize personally for the previous administration's behavior, and we were invited to advise on guidelines that would protect both historic properties and neighborhood aesthetics. As for Patricia, we heard she eventually moved to a condominium in the city with no homeowner associations. According to a former neighbor, she had started therapy and was beginning to understand the roots of her controlling behavior. The last we heard, she had opened a small interior design business, channeling her obsession with aesthetics into a more constructive outlet. 1 year after the fire, our family gathered at the new sign for a private moment of reflection. "Do you think Grandpa would approve of how we handled everything?" I asked Dad as we stood side by side. He was quiet for a moment. "I think he'd say we stood our ground without losing ourselves in the process," he finally replied. "That's all he ever wanted for this place, for it to remain true to what it is, despite whatever pressures came along." Mom joined us, slipping her hand into Dad's. "And it's still here. Still the same Miller farm it's always been. Different sign, same heart." The story of our sign became something of a local legend, retold with various embellishments at community gatherings. For our family, it remained a story about resilience and the unexpected ways challenges can strengthen what we care about most. The new sign stood as both a symbol of what was lost and what was gained, physically different from its predecessor but carrying the same spirit, the same welcome, the same promise that some things endure despite all attempts to change them. So if you ever find yourself passing a small organic farm with a beautifully carved wooden sign at its entrance, slow down and take a moment to appreciate it. Behind every sign, every family business, every piece of heritage preserved against the relentless pressure to modernize, there's a story of people who decided that some things are worth fighting for. And if you look carefully at the base of our sign, you'll see a small brass plaque that tells part of that story in just 5 words. Restored 2025, still standing strong. It doesn't mention Patricia Coleman or HOA battles or legal settlements. It doesn't need to. The sign itself, still there, still welcoming, still true to its original purpose, tells you everything you really need to know about what happens when someone tries to burn away history. Sometimes, from those ashes, something even more enduring rises.